Yeah, yeah.
And he just looks at my numbers.
Yeah.
And then looks over at me. He's like, "You jerk."
Just think about that. I mean, if you have 1,215 shares, now if they're paying $2 a share, that's a pretty good, decent chunk of income. And I don't know what your payout on your net deposit is at that point. But maybe you're at a place where you're like, well, I don't necessarily, do I have to take the $1,000 as income? You don't. You could actually take that $1,000 and say, I'm not ready to take that income yet.
Okay, so whenever we talk about legacy, this metaphor always comes up when me and you are talking about it, or we're talking about it with somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of glad we're going to go over it today, because I think there's some good pieces that we can pull out of it. And it's just a good example to use, whether somebody watching this takes something from it, or just to expound on it for ourselves, because honestly, I think it fits really, really well into legacy. So I don't want to take it away, but today we're going to kind of take a walk through the legacy orchard, if you will.
Yeah.
So paint me a picture about, like, if you're talking to somebody about legacy, you always do it so well. So paint me the picture of the apple orchard.
Yeah. So, when you come to legacy, as we've talked about the last few weeks, we talked about like legacy letters, right? A couple of weeks ago, and how that's the part of legacy where you're kind of handing your heart and your values off. And that has a multiplying effect for generations. That's a very important part of legacy as well, not just the dollars and cents. However, when you do talk about legacy, the dollar and cents are also a part of that conversation, because you're handing off assets. And how you hand them off and what kind you hand off and all those things, those are an important aspect of your total plan. And so a lot of times when we talk about legacy, we talk about the orchard metaphor, where, say someone's got $1 million that they've saved. We call it, we use 1 million apples they've got, right?
Yep.
And you can be like, well, we want our children to get, whatever's left here, or whatever we're planning. We have a specific number. We want to give them our apples, So we always tell people, you can give them the 1 million apples, and here's how you can do it. Here's how you can transfer those apples to them. And then your children can take those apples and consume them and live off the proceeds of what you've given them. Or there's a way, maybe we could show you how to position so those 1 million apples can be planted in such a way that those 1 million apples actually become an apple orchard, where it's the ability to create more and more apples each and every year without diminishing the base value of the asset itself.
Yeah.
So instead of just giving 1 million apples, maybe we give them several apple trees that produce the apples, but the trees continue to grow and flourish for years and generations to come, as opposed to just the apples themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And it really fits into it. And I think he even brought it up when we talked with Paul about legacy, and Paul and Kevin. I think it came up where it's like, what we do today doesn't necessarily just affect ourselves or even just our children, but it can affect generations on. Mm-hmm. And so I think it fits in perfectly. Whereas the apple orchard metaphor, that'll keep going if you tend to it correctly, and then teach your children how to tend to it, and then their children teach their children how to tend to it.
Right.
And so then we always get talking about dividends when it comes to this, because I think that sort of investment vehicle fits perfectly into the metaphor. Mm-hmm. And I just want to preface, none of this is investment advice. My dad and I, we're just talking about our experience with dividends and some research that we've done. You take with it and do whatever you'd like.
Yep. Because we have not considered your personal situation as your fiduciary, so we're not telling you what you should or shouldn't do. This is just us having a conversation.
Yes.
About apples, fruit, oranges, and whatever kind of fruit you like.
Correct. Yep. It can be whatever you like.
Yes. Right.
The world is your oyster, if you will.
Right.
So that being out of the way, let's get talking about it. So how does, continue to paint the picture, does dividends income and dividend investing kind of fit into the apple orchard metaphor to get started?
Right. And before I get to that specifically, what you had just mentioned before about how, how to do it for you, your children, your children's children, sometimes that can feel Like that'd be a really complex thing to have to figure out.
Right.
And so I just want to say that it doesn't have to be complex. There's some simple things you can do to make a machine that continues to produce the fruit without it having to be really complicated. It
Yep.
doesn't have to be. So when you bring up dividends, dividend income is basically, there are going to be some people watching here that aren't familiar with that. So just in a basic gist, a dividend is, especially like if you're talking about like stock dividends,
Yep.
if we're going to be that specifically, it's where you become an owner of a company by you go out and you purchase shares in a company. So let's say like Coca-Cola or Procter and Gamble, some household name, companies. If you went out today in the stock market saying, well, today a share of Coca-Cola is, $65, $55, whatever it is right now. I don't even know off the top of my head. And you went out, you bought one share. So you give them $55. Okay. Now you're an owner of that company. Not a very big owner, but you have a
very
share.
Small owner.
Yep,
of the
but you have
company.
a share in that company. And with Coca-Cola, for example, what they do is they say, well, for our owners, for our shareholders, we have declared that, this year we're going to pay you a certain amount for every share that you own. We're going to pay you in a dividend. Okay. So to make the number simple here, so Coca-Cola, XYZ company, you're an owner. If you have 1,000 shares, let's just make the math simple. Let's say a company was selling shares for $10, okay? And you went out and you bought 1,000 shares at $10, right? So you've invested
$10,000.
$10,000, okay? So now you have an apple tree worth $10,000, okay? Now this company says, hey, shareholders, thank you for your investment. We're now able to make our widgets or our service, our product to the general public because we've raised money from our owners. They've given us these funds. And as a result of the profitability of the company, we're going to pay you a dividend. And let's say they're going to pay you $1 for this year for every share you own. Okay, so you own 1,000 shares. Your asset's worth $10,000. And so this year, well, I got 1,000 shares. They're going to give me $1 for every share. I'm going to make $1,000 in income this year.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Now, there's a couple things you can do. You can take that $1,000 to put in your bank account, go on a trip, go out and have a nice dinner. You could just take it in as income and do what you want with it. A really nice dinner. Right. That $1,000. But maybe you're at a place where you're like, well, I don't necessarily, do I have to take the $1,000 as income? You don't. You could actually take that $1,000 and say, I'm not ready to take that income yet. I would rather take it and go and reinvest it, we call it. Or I'm going to go and replant it. I want to plant more apple trees. So we call that reinvesting. So you go in and you're going to buy more shares, more apple trees. And so let's just say, for argument's sake, that the share price was still $10. So I got $1,000 now. I'm going to go back and I'm going to buy how many more shares with my $1,000 at $10? I'm going to buy another 100 shares, right? Right?
Yep.
So now, how many shares do I have? 1,100 shares, right? So now I have 1,100 shares.
Yep.
Now, next year, let's say they're paying $1 a share. Now my income's what, $1,100?
Yep.
Right? So you can see that income, if you keep reinvesting, continue to grow. You keep planting trees into the future. Over time, that compounding of just over and over doing that simple practice is going to yield much fruit in the future if you don't interrupt the process.
Right.
Because here's what happens a lot of times is people are concerned about market volatility.
Yep.
So let's say the market goes through a volatile time. People say the market drops 50%. Let's say really bad. We're entering a recession, okay? So let's say that company's share price goes from $10 to $5, okay? Well, my original $10,000 investment is now worth $5,000.
Right.
Right? It's worth half. But if I don't panic and I don't sell because I'm afraid I got to get out of the market, how many shares do I own? I still own my 1,000 shares.
1,100 shares.
1,100 shares, right? And they're going to pay me $1 per share, right?
Right.
So I get $1,100. The income doesn't change because I didn't sell my shares. I didn't panic and sell.
Right.
So my income stayed the same. And now if I'm reinvesting, Here's the question. Would I rather pay $10 for my shares I'm now reinvesting? Would I rather pay 10?
Mm-hmm.
Or would I rather pay 5?
Exactly.
I'd rather pay $5 because I can buy twice as many than I
Mm-hmm.
could at 10.
Right.
So now what does my income do the next year? It grew even more
Explodes.
because of the volatility.
Exactly.
So if I don't panic and don't sell and just let the reinvestment process happen through the dips and through the high times and the low times that I can continue to buy, I'm going to have myself a nice little orchard that's much larger 30 years from now, let's say, than it is today if I don't interrupt the process.
Yeah. And I think that confronts the widely accepted growth mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I gotta look for the best companies that are gonna grow. I gotta look for something that's gonna get me rich quick, or something that's gonna explode in the next few years,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to the tried and true process of patience and just letting the compounding interest grow. So what are some give me some examples, because I know one of the biggest things whenever I've been in conversations about this, people have talked about, it's like, well, okay, so that in that recession example, if something really bad happened, who's to say that company's going to keep paying a dividend?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, exactly. What if the company can't keep paying a dividend for
Right.
some reason? Are there companies that have cut dividends before? Absolutely.
Right.
Once they declare a dividend for the year, that's what they're going to pay.
Mm-hmm.
Could they the next year say, oh, instead of $1, we're going to pay 80 cents? Yeah, sure, they could do that. There have companies that do that, but there have been many companies that don't do that, and in fact have done the opposite. There is a lot of companies out there that, through all the volatility of the markets, have continued to increase their dividend payout even through the downtimes. Now, why can they do that, right? Well, when you're looking at strong companies that can do that, I like to call them old boring companies, right? Like if you take an ExxonMobil, for example, they've been paying dividends since 1882.
Right.
That was when they first started paying dividends, and they've
Mm-hmm.
been paying ever since.
Right. What's the other company? It's the Bank of Nova Scotia
Yeah.
has
Yes.
been paying dividends since 1834 or something.
Right. Since Andrew Jackson was president of the United States, the Bank of Nova Scotia has been paying dividends.
Just
yeah.
think about how many different economies that company's been through that's continually increased their dividend.
Right.
So like, what makes the company stronger as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to other companies?
Right. Yeah. So that's probably another episode to get into all the nitty gritty,
Right.
but just a
Just
high
a
level.
high level overview. Yeah.
If you look at a company, we look at one metric. You can look at something called cash flow, right? That's money coming into a company. Okay, money comes into a company because they're selling a service, a product, right? But we also know that money flows out of a company because they have expenses. They have payroll and benefits and buying raw materials maybe, and all the expenses. So cash flow in, cash flow out. Then you have to look at something called free cash flow. With all the cash flow coming in and going out, how much of that are they able to retain and keep themselves? How much in bank? How profitable are they?
So
do they have
retained earnings are
retained
important.
earnings are very important, for example. So if you have a company that's able to continue to increase and pay their dividend through wild economic swings or housing market crisis or high inflation or so forth, they probably have good free cash flow, a lot of retained earnings, and probably had it for a long period of time. And those retained earnings allow them to continue to pay those dividends faithfully because they can ride out rough economic times because they have plenty of cash on hand, which makes it a very reliable or a higher degree of certainty that income that I'm relying on from that company is going to continue to pay. So that's just like one small example of something you can look at.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So you had looked up or not looked up, you just pulled some statistics and things like that just for some examples.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious to hear about it. And it kind of fits in with your $10,000 example.
Yeah.
So if you put $10,000 in, for example, in some companies, what would happen?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I'll give you a couple examples here. So I used Procter and Gamble earlier, so I'll just use them. So if you map out like the last 30 years, if you planted an apple tree at Procter and Gamble apple tree with $10,000 like 30 years ago, okay, and so you bought the shares at that price 30 years ago, And we can look at it two ways. Let's say you just took the dividends as income during that time
you
and
just
didn't
use the
reinvest
income.
them. Yeah, you didn't
Yep.
reinvest them. What would the value of that stock be today, or that asset, that apple tree? That's still paying dividends. It's still producing fruit. So a $10,000 investment at Procter & Gamble 30 years ago today, with no reinvesting, would be worth $130,403.16. It's not bad.
It's not bad.
No, that's actually just under 9% average return per year.
Yeah.
Okay, which not too shabby.
No.
For a dividend stock without a lot of volatility. Procter & Gamble, thank you for toothpaste.
Yep.
And all the other things that household products you make for us. 130,403. Okay. Now, if that same person, instead of taking the dividend income, had reinvested the dividends for all 30 years and just kept rebuying and purchasing shares, the account value would be $201,518.29.
Which is insane.
Yeah, which is $71,000 more in value. And so that's just the value side. Not only did the value grow exponentially more, that puts you now at almost 11%, 10.5% annualized return instead of 9. Okay, so about a point and a half more. But you owned 581 shares when you first bought. And then 30 years later, you now own 1,215 shares.
Which
is more than double.
Explodes your income.
Right. So more than double the shares you now own, explodes your income. And now not only is it, much higher in value, but the income is now much higher because now you have 1,200 shares. And if you start taking income now, that apple orchard is really going to be yielding a great, especially your payout on your net deposit. Because think about that. I mean, if you have 1,215 shares, and I don't even know what Procter & Gamble's paying right now. If they're paying $2 a share, that's a pretty good, decent chunk of income. And I don't know what your payout on your net deposit is at that point, but you only invested $10,000.
Right.
Right?
Right.
That's all you ever put into the account.
Right.
Is just 10 grand.
Right. Because did you write a check to buy all those shares?
No, you did not.
No. The income that you made from the original investment bought the shares and increased your income. You didn't have to pay for more income.
Exactly. So if you think about it, you invested $10,000 and now it's worth $201,000.
Right.
I mean, what's the total return on that for you? It's
crazy.
It's crazy numbers.
It is crazy.
Right?
Numbers.
Silly numbers. And the asset is still producing income for you.
Right.
Okay. Or, if it's 30 years and maybe you started this at maybe you were 60 30 years ago and now you're 90, you could, and if you pass away, you're handing off a $200,000 asset that's paying on 1,219 shares for your heirs.
Right.
Right. That's the orchard.
Right.
In motion.
Well, I mean, any like younger person too, like this is like a cheat code.
Time value of money. Yeah, a cheat code. If you are a young person, you want to consider looking into this and doing your own homework on this. This could be something that, you're 20 years old. In 30 years, you're 50. 30 years later, you're 80.
Any 20-year-old that's willing to do like some work and like put their head down.
Yeah.
You can make $10,000.
Yes. Yes.
You can do it.
Yep.
To invest even, not
Yes.
even just like $10,000 alone. And it doesn't even have to be that much either, right? That's just an example that we used, but
start with 5,000.
Start with 5,000.
Yep.
Start with 500. Start with 5.
Just make consistent deposits and just let it keep buying. You have no idea how silly the numbers could be in 30 years for a young person.
No, we'll have to go over an example because the numbers are actually stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember talking with Paul and going over my plan or whatever.
Yeah.
And he just looks at my numbers.
Yeah.
And then looks over at me and he's like, "You jerk."
Right. Yeah.
Because it's like, and it's not like I'm doing anything special, just my age and the time value of money, just letting compounding interest. He's like,
right.
If only I was your age.
Right. Yeah. So let's use the outlier example here. Altria Group, right? MO. So a $10,000 investment 30 years ago. Okay. Now this is where the dividend this is where it gets silly. If you are just taking the dividend income Which you still have to remember, if you didn't reinvest it, you have to remember you were getting all that income over 30 years too.
Mm-hmm.
So that's return of your money.
Yep.
You received far more back, more than your $10,000 in just income, than you, right?
Right.
Let alone the growth on the investment. So $10,000 investment in Altria Group 30 years ago would have grown to $85,253 over 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
That's if you took the dividends and
Yeah.
didn't reinvest.
Right.
7.4% annualized return.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, not bad.
Yeah.
If you reinvested the dividends, it'd be worth $573,289.84.
It's just silly.
You bought originally 415 shares. You want to guess how many shares you have now? You just take a guess.
I don't even know, like 5,000.
9,658 shares. Now, if you have 9,658 shares 30 years from now, and let's say Altria Group is only paying $1 for their share, that'd be $9,658 in income. You invested $10,000.
Right.
So if they were only paying $1, you're making an income per year what you originally invested in just income,
Right.
right? And so the annualized return went from 7.4 if you reinvested to 14.5% annually. Annually, okay? And so now you have an apple orchard worth over $500,000 on 9,600 shares paying an annual income of a lot.
Yeah.
Because they're not paying $1 a share, they're paying a lot more than that.
Right.
Right. So that's just the power of this. Now, this is really an important point. That's because the person bought, and you think over 30 years. So 30 years ago, what was 1985? Is that right?
Yep.
Okay. So in the 80s, mortgages were 18%.
Oh,
Okay.
great. Lovely.
Bad market 1987. Good decade 90 to 2000. And then you had the dot-com bubble of 2000. And then you had 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
First 3 years of 2000, 2001, 2002, down 3 years straight. That's rare. But we had a national crisis, a terrorist attack, and we had the dot-com bubble, tough time economically. 2008 housing crisis. 2018 market was down. COVID. 2022 NASDAQ was down 25%. So that stock, Altria Group, went through all of that. If I started in 1985, I'm just
Right.
using the 30 years.
Sure.
They went through all those ups and downs, and that's the result of
Right.
the investment. If you didn't panic and sell
Right.
during those down times, that's why that acceleration of growth happened in those dividend stock, this particular one, because when that market dipped, you were compounding shares when you were reinvesting those dividends. You were buying them so much cheaper.
Right.
So it was just a compounding machine. So I always tell people, it never is going to look super sexy the first couple of years.
Right.
If you take a penny and you double it for your first 5 years, you're still doubling it, but it doesn't look like a lot.
Right.
But if you don't stop the process, 30 years from now, it's amazing,
Right.
right? If you just keep the process going.
Yeah. And just like to think like the peace of mind that could give a person. Like,
Yeah.
like not having to worry about, oh my gosh, what the market's doing and everything. Because if the market goes down, you're like, oh, great, I can buy more shares cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right.
And if your value goes down, you're still getting paid the same amount of income.
Right. Exactly.
You know, like,
and your mark and the value of the account will go down sometimes. It will.
right.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, then you'll see the next year if you're reinvesting how your income went up like double the amount
Exactly.
or however much the amount because you're buying cheaper shares. And it's like you can sleep easy at night. It's like, oh, it doesn't matter what's happening. It's like I don't even need to think about it because it's like a machine that works on its own.
Which brings up a great point. True investing, I had someone tell me once, it's like watching paint dry.
Yeah.
If you want something flashy and exciting, take $800 and go to Vegas.
Right.
Right? Because when you're looking for the shiny, the next best thing, you're really typically in speculation at that point.
Yep.
You're not investing.
Mm-mm.
Investing is like watching paint dry. It's slow. It's patient. You let it do its thing, and you don't interrupt the process, right? So, if just at a broader scale, if you look at like the S&P 500, I was looking at these stats from the Dalbar study, but over the last 90 years of the S&P, 40% of the S&P's total return is because of dividends.
You don't hear that every day.
No. 40% of the total return is because of dividends. That's unbelievable.
That is crazy.
But the other thing is that compared to the S&P, like your aristocrat stocks, your top people, firms that have been increasing their dividend for 25 or more years in a row,
Right.
Have outperformed the broader market over multiple decades. And often with lower volatility, because they, if you're with energy companies or things like that, they don't have a lot of swing usually in their price, their highs and lows. So you have to be in it for the long term.
Yeah.
Though.
And it's not complicated either.
Right.
Like, it's not complex, right?
Right.
I think maybe some of the time people don't talk about it all the time because it's like you could do it yourself.
You could.
As an advisor,
Mm-hmm.
you tell people, you're like, you don't need me to do this,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm just going to show you
Mm-hmm.
how to do it because
Yep.
it's like, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, why would I not tell you about this?
Exactly. So, if there's people watching today who are maybe in a place where they're like, I'd like to learn more about this. I'd like to see if this is something I could set up for myself, or I'm getting close to retirement. Maybe this would be a great source of income for some retirement.
Or I'm a young person and I want to learn about it as well and get started.
Yeah, there's going to be a link for our calendar in the show notes that you can get, so you can schedule an appointment. We can have a talk about your specific situation. Because again, we're not giving advice to what you should or shouldn't do today. We're just talking to you about a concept. But so to get back to where you started with this, so you start with your small apple orchard and you let the compounding grow and do its thing, you can create a really large orchard. And then when your time here is done, you can hand an orchard off to your next generation. They can continue to receive that same income, whether through a trust or directly or however, you want to arrange it.
Or continue to grow it.
Yep, and continue to grow it on and on again. For charitable type things, gifts, it can be really good for a charity to have an income-producing asset that can continue to give scholarships. And that's happened several times in history. There's famous people who have done that.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are not famous who have done
Right.
things like that.
Yep.
People you would never expect who did it in the quiet and in the behind the scenes, but have given off incredibly large gifts to universities, colleges, charities, foundations, different things that continue to bless people while they're even gone. They're still speaking and still having impact. And that's the power of doing this. And like you said, it's a really simple, straightforward strategy. It's just that you want to make sure you pick the right companies and have the right configuration. And that's where maybe people like us can help you walk through that process. And if that's important to you, please get our calendar, sign up for some time. We'd be more than happy to talk with you through this. Anything else on your heart or mind on this?
No, I'm just excited to dig more into it because it's kind of incredible stuff.
It is, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a simple concept that you could talk about over and over and over again.
Right.
Just keep reinvesting your time.
And I do. Yeah, right.
So,
yeah.
Well, thanks everyone for watching today. Please hit the subscribe button and check out the show notes and go to our Substack and read some of our articles we have there too. And we look forward to meeting some of you real soon. Thanks.